All right. Welcome back to the Yukon Gold podcast with Will S. This is the first time I have invited a guest on to the podcast uh, to talk a little bit about his background in renewable energy, uh, straight out of the state of Illinois. Without further ado, this is Tim Montague. How you doing
Hey,
tonight, Tim?
Will. Hey, it's good. I'm good. It's good to be here. Thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity.
So just for our listeners here who don't really know what you're about, you host the Clean Power Hour podcast. Is that correct?
Yes, I do. I started podcasting, pretty regularly back in 2017.
Hmm.
My first show was called the Solar Podcast. Then I branched out with the second show, the Clean Power Hour, and now I'm just focused on the Clean Power Hour, which is twofold. It's a news roundup of the energy
Yeah.
transition news, so solar, wind, and storage news. I have a co host who is a journalist for PV Magazine. His name is John Weaver. And then we bring on technology CEOs and clean tech entrepreneurs talking about next gen solar PV, storage, etc.
All right. And you are based just south of Chicago, close to Freeport now.
So I live in Champaign Urbana, which is in central Illinois. Illinois is very long and skinny. It's 6 hours tip to toe.
Okay.
Chicago is in northern Illinois, and I work for a EPC. That's a solar installer called Fossler Solar in the town of Freeport, and we're focused on utility scale solar and storage.
Okay. Yeah, and for myself, I just moved up to the White Horse, Yukon, which actually is an independent electrical grid from the rest of North America, which is kind of cool. Um, so I guess how did you get into the solar PV renewable energy space? If what's your original background, and how did you go from what you are now to where you started? It's quite the journey, it
Yeah, I
seems.
got introduced to solar as a kid. I lived in the city of Albuquerque, New Mexico, in the desert southwest. My dad was a professor at the University of New Mexico teaching environmental studies. We started doing solar thermal, making hot water with solar panels in our backyard. And there was a energy fair at UNM every summer that we would participate in. We also made solar cookers. PV was scarce because it was very expensive. This was in the mid 70s,
Mm, yeah.
and but now we've had tremendous cost adoption curve whereby solar is decreased significantly, many hundreds of times. It was $100 a watt in the 70s. Now it's 20 to 30 cents a watt, and that's because both the technology has matured, the volume of manufacturing has gone up tremendously, and we're also now adopting solar en masse. Solar is globally the cheapest source of new energy on the grid. And as a result, it is the dominant new source of energy on the grid globally. Most Americans still don't know this because you don't see solar in most geographies, but it is coming.
Okay.
Um, but fast forward to 2016, I've always worked in something related to sustainability or technology or helping people. Those are the threads that connect my careers. I'm an ecologist by training. I studied forest ecology at UW Madison. I was also a social worker. I was a recruiter. I've done many things. But in 2016, we got legislation here in Illinois called the Future Energy Jobs Act, which was designed to help us fulfill our renewable portfolio standard. Across the US, there are 30 some states that have RPSs as they're called, and our goal here in Illinois was to achieve a 25% renewable energy on the grid by 2025. That unfortunately was broken. So we were not going to achieve that goal by 2025, but we did see a major tranche of wind come in. We now have several gigawatts of wind across the state, and FIJA, as we call it, was adding 3,000 megawatts or 3 gigawatts of solar to the grid. And that's a wonderful thing. It does take these kinds of programs in places like the Midwest where energy is very cheap. We have very cheap coal and nuclear power here in the Midwest in Illinois. 40% of our grid is nuclear power. And we're not building new nuclear plants across the US anymore. There's one still under construction because you can't build nuclear for less than, say, 30 cents a kWh. You can build a big solar plant for 2 to 4 cents per kWh. So you see, it's just the economics that are really feeding wind and solar now. So it was the Future Energy Jobs Act, though, that really caused me to dive in with both feet, and I found a EPC. Um, we have this expression in the solar industry, which I'm sure you're familiar with, but maybe your listeners are not. EPC stands for Engineering, Procurement, and Construction, and that is also a solar installer. So we're a design build solar installer. I went to work for a company called Continental Energy Solutions. Wonderful company, fourth generation family business, got into solar in '08. They were an early adopter. And we're doing large rooftop and community solar projects across the state of Illinois. My goal, once I realized, you know, how commercial industrial solar worked and community solar worked, I set the goal of getting into utility scale solar. And Continental didn't quite have the appetite for that. So I had to move along, and I found Fossler Solar up in northern Illinois. Paul Fossler is the owner, and he's a very ambitious, 40 something entrepreneur who inherited a general contracting business, bought his father and brother out, and now segued into doing nothing but solar. And he does CNI, large CNI, but also now growing into larger scale projects, 10 to 100 megawatt solar projects, and that is my passion. And we'll be doing a lot of solar and storage, and we can talk about how that plays out in the course of the discussion here tonight, Will.
Yeah, and just a little bit more from my background side of things. I originally, like, I grew up in a hydro town, BC Hydro here um, in British Columbia, and then the Yukon has the Yukon Energy Corporation, and Alberta is kind of, again, more similar to this where you're from, more coal and natural gas power. Um, so again, I'm primarily based in Western Canada, and the incentives over here, well, at least in British Columbia, kind of went by the wayside. Ontario, I don't know. Have you heard about the Ontario Microfit program? Ran from about 2010 to 2018. It was a 10-year project. Feed-in tariffs from the
Yeah,
provincial
I
government.
heard about that. I ran into a lot of Canadian manufacturers when I went to solar trade shows here in the US. There's quite a few companies, especially from Ontario, that are based there, making, for example, racking for
Mhm.
ground mount and rooftop solar. And so I was always curious, like, what's going on in Ontario? And they explained that there was this feed-in tariff there. I think that's come and gone, but that's the nature of the industry, right? There are these waves, and we've had that here. Like Illinois was a boom, and then it was a bust. Yeah, we boomed in 2017 to 2020, and then we busted. Luckily, now we have new legislation to bolster the RPS. Now we're aiming for 40% renewables by 2030, and it'll be happy days again starting next year. But it was tough the last year and a half. Um,
Yeah.
not a complete not a complete bust, but it was just tapering off. And um, so that is something that I have to caution people about when they get into solar. Just you have to get to know your geography and what's going on there, and get familiar with the associations and the legislation, and don't put all your eggs in one basket geographically, because it's going to ebb and flow. And that's another thing that I really was looking for in my next move, which is now Fossler Solar, was a company that was working in multiple markets, full steam ahead. And we're building solar projects in New York State, in Maryland, in Virginia, and soon in Maine, as well as here in Illinois and across the Midwest. There's a boom of you know, both rooftop and community and utility here in Illinois, but also a lot of utility happening in all the Midwestern states: Wisconsin, Iowa, Michigan, Ohio, and down into the Tennessee Valley. So, and various things drive that. Like in some parts, it's the utilities that are driving it. In some parts here in Illinois, it's legislation, state legislation. So it just depends.
Yeah, and it's somewhat similar here in Canada. I don't know if the U.S. has a national strategy or not, but here in Canada we have the Canadian Infrastructure Bank, or a Green Bank, as you like to call it, and they're pushing uh, 10 billion dollars worth of investment over the next uh, five 5 to 7 years, and that's everything from public transit, clean power, more green infrastructure, broadband, trades, and production.
Yeah,
So
that's a really good thing, right? It's such a public good. It's going to clean the air, which makes it a healthier environment for humanity and all of the rest of the living world. It creates a more resilient infrastructure, with the opportunity to have microgrids and incentivizing the adoption of batteries. Solar's great, but it's intermittent, right? So you got to have a
right,
storage mechanism, whether that's a lithium ion battery or green hydrogen. I mean, we get 10,000 times more sunlight than we use on an annual basis, right? We're just swimming in solar energy. And so the trick is, how do you capture that? You
right,
need the technology. And heretofore, before 2010, it was out of reach. It wasn't economical. And so we didn't have a solar boom. But starting in 2010, it really took off. And now the engine is running, and we're about to go vertical. We're about to blast off and start adding huge amounts of solar here in the US, a terawatt by 2035,
okay,
and then 3 terawatts by 2050. We have something like 100 gigawatts now. So a terawatt is 1,000 gigawatts. So we're going to 10x by 2035, and then we're going to 30x by 2050. And what this means is a huge economic boom. It means jobs. It means construction projects. And of course, all of these goods that go along with it and ancillary economic benefits. It's really heady days in the energy industry, and the fossil industry is going bye bye. Electrification of transportation is the big dog. 40% of our carbon emissions come from that sector, and we are now at that tipping point where EVs are cheaper than ICE engine vehicles. And so we will see mass adoption in places like Northern Europe. We already see in Norway, 80% of new vehicles are pure EV. And states are outlawing or banning ICE engines starting in 2030. That's happening on a state by state basis here in the US. New Jersey, New York, Massachusetts, California all have legislation either passed or near passage. What's going on with electrification of transportation in Canada, Will?
well, again, it comes down to a province by province. Um, there have been incentives. So if you go to purchase an electric vehicle, whether that be, well, British Columbia, I think, had a $5,000 rebate not that long ago, and I think Ontario had a similar program. So again, yeah, it's a province by province breakdown, like for 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 the rebate programs, and I'm assuming there's something similar in the states. So
Yeah, every region has their own incentives, and Right now in Illinois, we're about to get, I think, a something like a $4,000 rebate for the purchase of a vehicle. There's also a federal rebate in the works, and these things help. Um, Soon we won't need incentives. An EV is just much simpler than a internal combustion engine vehicle. There's many fewer moving parts, and that's going to make it cheaper to build, own, operate. And then we have automation. Full self driving is coming. Once we get level 5 full self driving, people won't even want to own a vehicle. It'll just be transportation as a service. And I'm a huge fan of an author named Tony Seba, who has written a book called Clean Disruption. He's an adjunct professor at Stanford University. Just Google him, Tony Seba, Seba, and he lays it out. And he's a legit author and social scientist. And these disruptions have happened, for hundreds and thousands of years, and it's a perfectly natural thing.
Mm.
It's hard to see though when you're approaching a tipping point, because the thing is an ice cube, an ice cube, an ice cube, right? It's approaching 0 degrees Celsius, right? It's -5, -4, -3, -2. Then it hits zero, and then all of a sudden it turns to water when you get to 1 degree Celsius, right? Or 33 degrees Fahrenheit, and and there's that phase shift. Economics work in very similar ways. The example that Tony gives is, you look at New York City in 1901. It's all horse and buggy. Then you
Right.
fast forward to 1913, and it's all ice engine. There's one horse and buggy in the same photo. There was one ice engine in the 1901 photo. The ice engine was invented in the late 1890s, but so it wasn't. People didn't have anything against horses. The ice engine just was more convenient, faster, cheaper, and you got to where you wanted to go faster and more conveniently. And with no poop on the ground, right? So horses went bye bye. Not that we got rid of horses entirely, but now they're a hobby more than a everyday part of our lives. So that's what's going to happen with electrification of transportation and the decentralization of energy. I predict that the utility model is going to be completely disrupted. Today we have regulated monopoly utilities across the U.S. That was a good thing historically. It provided this very stable foundation that you want a grid that's up and it's very stable. Well, the downside is those companies are not incentivized to innovate. The grid looks like it did 100 years ago. Thomas Edison would recognize the grid that we have today. And
It's not a smart grid at all.
and and so it's change or die. And now with with rooftop solar and a battery, right, you can locally produce all your energy. You don't need the big grid in many places if you can install that hardware. And increasingly, we're going to do that. And so the grid operators have to figure out a new model, and that will happen.
Yeah, and it's funny you should mention that the monopolies don't really want to innovate. Like, it's one of the reasons why I moved up to the Yukon, because they're looking for more independent power projects up here of the renewable utility scale. Where I'm from in British Columbia, it's pretty much all hydro, and they've cut away a lot of the individual independent power producer. The IPP program got basically scrapped in 2018. So, and I used to work at a wind farm. It was it was the largest wind farm in British Columbia, in Western Canada, actually. So it's 60 turbines, so 180 megawatts. And it's funny you should mention the electric vehicles. Um, are you leaning towards the Rivian truck, or the Cybertruck, or both?
Well, I was a Tesla owner. I owned a Model Y Tesla. I bought a trailer camper that was going to really impact my range with the Model Y. So it's a small teardrop camper, but and the Model Y could tow the trailer, but because I want to go camping in like the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, where it's very rural, and there is not today a network of superchargers, I decided to revert to an ICE engine temporarily. I have a deposit on a Rivian, which is a pure EV pickup truck made here in Illinois in Bloomington Normal. Rivian is based in Southern California, but has a factory here. They took over an old Mitsubishi factory, and they're making Rivian trucks and SUVs. And then I have a reservation for a Cybertruck. So the Rivian will probably be available first. It
Yeah.
is it is a premium vehicle, so we'll see if I want to drop uh, the the precious coin that is I've specified. I've kind of decked it out. It's got a built-in camping stove. Um, it's got some really nice bells and whistles. It's a beautiful vehicle, and they're in the wild now. There are real trucks on the road, and you can see these reviews on YouTube. So check it out, Rivian. Rivian. And then the Cybertruck is still a little bit smoke and mirrors. The deadline keeps getting pushed back. I think they pushed it to 2023 now for the
Oh yeah.
release. And Tesla, I understand this. Elon just wants to fuel his journey to Mars with
Mhm.
Tesla basically, and the Model Y is about to be the most popular car in America. It's a lovely car. It's not perfect, but it's a very good car. It's a small SUV, kind of like a Rav4, a Toyota Rav4, and uh, and then Model 3. So they're selling those things like hotcakes, and they're about to start pumping them out of their new factory in Austin, Texas. They only
S-
make them today in L.A. area. Oh no, sorry, Fremont in the Bay Area. But yeah, they're about to get a second car factory here in the U.S. and so they're focused on what's selling most and what's kind of the path of least resistance. But eventually, the Cybertruck will be an interesting and I think very successful vehicle. They've taken pre-orders, I think, on something like 650,000 Cybertrucks. So people have responded positively to that, even though it is pretty space age looking or Mad Max. Um, People like it.
yeah, and now that you mentioned the Rivian, I'm actually leaning more towards the Rivian. um, I I opted for a Ford Ranger just because there was no electric options at the time.
Yeah, and the
Um,
F-150 electric vehicle is coming out next year, I think. That
mhm.
is going to be a pretty sweet thing. They've dialed in vehicle to grid, which is important, right? Because the truck has a huge battery, maybe
Yeah.
an 85 kWh battery, um, and so you can run critical loads from the truck. You can plug it into your panel in your house and run the lights and the refrigeration if the grid goes down. So and then if you have solar, right, you can charge that and be off grid, and that's a wonderful thing. So Ford and Sunrun are partnering on that initiative, I believe. And Sunrun is a national solar and storage company that does mostly residential, and their model is make it accessible. They're first and foremost they're leasing the equipment to residents, so you don't have this huge out of pocket. You're just it's like leasing a car. You're getting a solar plant and a battery, and then you have this off-grid capability, which, as we saw in February in Texas, is
Yes.
important because the grid does fail.
I did a podcast about that. What's going on in Texas right now? Well,
Yeah,
when
that was
you
a
when
that was
yeah,
that was a near miss too, Will, because they came within minutes of really going down. The whole ERCOT was about to go down for weeks, and they just barely avoided that. Um, I don't know exactly what they did to avoid that, but that catastrophe could have been much worse. I mean, as it was, the grid went down for days at a time, like 3 or 4 days. Several hundred people died as a result. People were camping in their homes, basically, freezing just piling on the blankets because the furnaces weren't working. When you don't have electricity, your gas furnace stops working. It needs electricity to ignite and do its job.
Yeah.
And so and you don't have a pump to pump water, and so they didn't have drinking water, they didn't have sanitation, they didn't have heat, they didn't have lights, and that's no fun, right? If you don't have electricity, you're really in a bad way. So um that's the one of the things I just love about solar and battery. Will, it gives you that possibility, and of course it gives that possibility to the 700 million people who live in the less developed world in Africa and Asia who don't have electricity and probably won't if they're waiting for the big grid. The big grid is not coming to those rural places, but just a few solar panels and a battery, and voila, you have lighting. You can run a TV, you can run a cell phone, charge a cell phone, and have connectivity and education, access to the outside world. And it really helps people improve their quality of life, gives them access to health care, et cetera, in ways that they just don't have without electricity.
Have you heard of the not-for-profit Light Up the World? L
I don't
L
think
U
so.
L
What
L
is
U
that?
T LUTW. It's a non-for-profit based out of Calgary, Alberta, and they do like you're talking about humanitarian trips down in Peru, a couple other countries, Ghana, I believe. Um,
Yeah.
and they do exactly what you just said. They bring solar panels and some battery technology, and they electrify these villages. Uh, it's called, yeah, Light Up the World is the
Yeah,
I
what a
think it,
wonderful way, wonderful way to change people's lives, like really fundamentally. Uh, i- y- it's hard to it's hard to describe, right? Because you and I don't know what it's like other
mm,
than when we go camping. And I love going camping. And but now when I go camping, I carry a big battery, so I can charge my phone and run my Wi-Fi router or whatever. I like being connected when I'm off grid, even. But yeah, electrification for rural communities is so important.
yeah, and I mean, and then of course, like I'm because I know the Yukon is kind of a it's kind of unique in Canada. Like I mentioned, it's not connected to the North American uh, infrastructure. It's
Hmm.
an isolated grid, and they're gonna have because winter is coming, Jon Snow. In the winter time here, they have a hard time with load shedding. So it's the whole idea if the cup is not big enough when the dark you're looking for the darkest coldest day night of the year in the Yukon, and they have to fire up diesel generators and LNG um, in order to meet the demand because they don't when everybody wants that power, turn on the lights, cook food, or you know their their oven turns on or their refrigerator, right? It all collectively. I mean, there's only 40 odd thousand people that live here in the Yukon, but there's mining operations, right? And that takes a fair amount of electricity, right? So they're really looking for what you're talking about, the combination of solar, wind, hydro, and battery storage, which is kind of it's the main reason that I moved up here to get involved with some of these projects. I actually applied to be on the board of directors for Yukon Energy. Very unique within North America.
So what is the future of energy in the Yukon? What is the next 10 years like? What's happening?
Well, their 10-year plan. I've looked at their 10-year summary, and they're really actually going like I don't know what you call it. We call our requests for proposals, RFPs.
Sure.
So they're they're looking to meet a 90% of their electricity with renewable and clean energy. So they're they're trying to squeeze. So currently they're at 90%, but they're trying to squeeze that up to so their milestone right now. So they're reaching to 2030, and they want to get up to 93%, and they want to have 600,000 zero emission vehicles on the road, or 6,000, pardon me. And they want to
Mm.
start replacing the fossil fuel heating systems with heat pumps.
Hmm.
Um, so, uh, and also, I don't know how much of it is how much of it is how big of a thing it is in the United States or Illinois, but there's 14 First Nations groups here in the Yukon,
Hmm.
and they all have their own individual jurisdictions and claims to the land. So all of these are done with First Nations partnerships.
Sure.
Um, so they're looking at building a pump storage facility at a place called Moon Lake. They want to do an expansion of the Atlan Hydro plant, which is actually owned by a First Nations group, which is actually on the BC side of the border. And they're looking to expand and upgrade the transmission network in the Southern Lakes area. It was proposed several times to run a new power line north of a place called Dease Lake in British Columbia, uh, at a place. The substation is the Bob Quinn Lake substation. Um, so I fully suspect eventually there will be a North American grid connection, but it's about a
Mm.
billion and a half to $2 billion infrastructure upgrade to get that transmission line extended. So I don't know. It's lots of opportunity, um, but we are fairly far north and desperate compared to compared to Illinois. A lot less populated, but
Yep.
the
Yeah,
go
it's so
ahead.
curious. I was just looking online. I mean, the Yukon is about uh, a third, a little less than a third the size of Alaska, but but the population of Alaska is 750,000 people. Um,
Yeah.
so it's, you know, 6, 7 times what the Yukon is, maybe more. Maybe I'm not doing that math right, but anyway, uh, I say hooray! You know, I love rural places. There's so many places that we've run over and completely populated and industrialized. We need to save some open spaces, and of course with climate change. I mean, there was an article in the New York Times today or yesterday about the Arctic in Russia.
Oh yes.
The Arctic Sea is opening up to global shipping because 1 million square miles of ice have melted. Grok that. That's a lot of ice.
Yeah,
And
and that's not reflecting back radiation anymore. It's getting absorbed.
oh yeah, right. Yeah, that is going to have additive effects. The loss of ice is a major problem per se, right, in the global climate change phenomenon. Um, but it is a boon for these little towns in far northern Russia and
Mhm.
probably parts of Canada. I don't. This was just about Russia, where now they have ports that will be active, and you can get places quicker going through, this Arctic route versus going through the Panama Canal. um,
Okay.
so it's a double edge, but yeah, change. There's a lot of change going to happen, and I tell my kids just be ready for change because that's going to be the constant. And um,
Yeah, yeah, the only thing the only constant in life is change. Yeah, we're I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I call it I have a term for what's going on right now. I call it apocalyptic optimistic. So it's a little bit of like have a prepper mentality and also like prepare for the worst, but hope.
Yeah, exactly. Prepare for the worst, hope for the best, and take action. It is code red. The IPCC, the most recent report they issued makes it very clear that we have a few years to get serious about decarbonizing the economy if
Mhm.
we want to stop catastrophic global climate change. And if we don't, there's going to be major disruption of food systems. There's going to be massive migration of people, which will disrupt economies. I like to say here in the Midwest, we're somewhat isolated because we see the storms and the fires, the storm that knocked out the power in New Orleans, Hurricane Ida, and of course the power outage in Texas in February, and the fires and the droughts out west. But if hundreds of thousands of people have to migrate, there's no place that's not going to be impacted, and it's coming. So we all have to raise our awareness, and the good news is that this can be a good for humanity. It can create jobs. It can create economic growth. It can create a safer, healthier, more resilient environment and built environment and a safer future for humanity. We all want the good life. Well, we all want the same thing, basically. Uh, you know, uh, and you and I certainly do have a very good life today. The question is, will we be able to hold on to that in 50 or 100 years?
Yeah.
I don't know. And in 50 years, I'll be in the ground. I'm 55. It's not likely that I'll live much past 100. Um, but of course, my grandchildren will be around, and I want them to have opportunity as well. I don't want them to live in a Mad Max world. That would be horrific. So if we can avoid that, we want to. And it doesn't mean that we have to sacrifice something, right? There's this whole either or mentality which really irritates me. I think it's a both and. We
Yeah.
can green the grid and decarbonize the economy and have a great healthy economy. So why wouldn't we do that? If we know that we can also make a safer future, whereas if we do business as usual, that is also potentially quote unquote good for certain economies and certain kinds of, certain people, but it creates such a high risk future which is unnecessary. And it I yeah, I think the proverbial shit will hit the fan if we do business as usual. So we need to act.
Well, the what you're talking about is legacy, right? Like what sort of legacy, like you said, do you want to leave for your future kids and grandkids? And if the train is heading for a cliff, you got to shift directions away from the cliff and towards something like what I like to call sustainability, right? I think that's something that I don't think we really talk about enough. Is there's, like you said, doing business as usual, and then there's sustainability. So it's yeah, we're I know. Do you have a carbon tax in the United States? Is that something that's popular or not popular there?
I mean, we have various and sundry forms of a carbon tax in certain geographies. Like here in Illinois, we have a tax on gasoline,
Hmm.
and that is a carbon tax. It's also well, if you use roads, we want you to pay a tax so that we can collect funds to fix the roads and make them robust, right? And this is a potential problem with the electrification of transportation, because now they're going, oh, we're going to have all EVs in 20 years. well, then people aren't going to be paying a gas tax. And so we have to figure out a different way to collect funds to fix the roads. And absolutely, we need to do that. So the carbon tax has shortcomings, but it works. It disincentivizes the use of gasoline. And California is the most progressive in this way. I'm no expert on carbon taxes, but the Biden administration is forced now to look at carbon taxes because their original clean energy plan has stalled thanks to uh, um, a small number of politicians. And so, so yeah, I mean, the carrot and the stick, those things really do work. And there's no reason we shouldn't deploy those tactics. We want to do it in a way that doesn't hurt low income people and makes it equitable and just. We want a just transition. We want people that are working in fossil fuel industries to find new employment in clean tech. If you can mine coal, you can install solar panels or work for a solar panel company, right? Uh, there's absolutely opportunity, and coal is going away, like it or not. And it wasn't solar that put the nail in coal's coffin; it was natural gas.
Mm.
I have coal in my blood. My grandpa ran the Black Diamond magazine in Chicago, which is a coal industry trade publication. I stand on those shoulders. I live in a coal state. We have huge coal reserves here in Illinois, but they're going to probably stay in the ground because of the economics of mining and burning coal are just now not competitive with wind, solar, and battery storage. So, if you're looking for an opportunity, I always love to shine a light on this. If you're casting about for a new career or a career change or a future career, think about the energy industry. It's going to be just pure growth for the next 50 years. And you can still do whatever you love doing. If you want to be a welder, if you want to be a tradesperson, if you want to be a salesperson, if you want to be an engineer, any kind of work within clean energy, there's huge opportunity. That is where the economy is going. So just shine a light on that and you'll be fine.
Yeah, and it's funny you should mention that. We actually have a grassroots organization in Canada. It's based in Alberta, but it was founded by a gentleman from Vancouver Island. He went to school at University of Victoria, but he was a boilermaker by trade, and that's how he funded his university. And he founded a group called Iron and Earth, and it's all about upskilling and reskilling uh, fossil fuel fossil fuel workers. Because I don't know what about yourself, but in 2014, when oil crashed, put a lot of tradespeople in that industry out of work here in Canada, and it basically came about by sitting around in lunchrooms around that time, and then now they have chapters all across Canada, Alberta, on the East Coast. A lot of the workers from the maritime provinces come out to Alberta to get their trade certifications. So they have chapters
Yeah,
in Alberta,
I'm looking at
Alberta.
this website. This is a great concept.
Yes.
Ironandearth.org. I love this.
Yeah.
And yeah, we absolutely need more initiatives like this to help workers who are displaced. There are going to be lots of stranded assets in the form of pipelines, power plants, platforms. It's so many ways, but there's popping up around that and using similar skill sets and technologies are is the hydrogen industry, for example. There's a huge opportunity for all kinds of technology related to moving and storing hydrogen, of course, building wind, solar, and battery farms. These are big facilities. We have a 1.65 gigawatt solar farm being built in Indiana, the state just to my east. And that's like 15,000 acres of solar panels. It's a huge project. It's going to take at least 5 years to build that project. And that's just one project. And there's now dozens of these ginormous renewable energy facilities being designed and built across the United States. And I have to think Canada as well. I mean, you're blessed with lots of hydropower, Will, which is a natural barrier to entry for the other technologies. But hydro is very clean. It's very low carbon. It's not the most ecologically friendly for other reasons, and so we're not building a lot of new hydro. And also it requires this very special geography. You got to have a river and a place to put a dam, etc. Um, but maybe micro hydro will be a thing. And but there's just so much opportunity in this energy transition. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, if I was to compare like apples to apples, I would say that Alberta and Illinois are probably, everyone compares Alberta to Texas, but um, in terms of like where Alberta is headed, they get a lot of solar insolation during, especially during the winter months. Like Calgary is like a very large hotspot. So
Mm.
some of the larger solar projects are like right now the Strathmore Solar Farm. There's 40.5 megawatt facility being being constructed. So that just got broke ground in May. So a lot of this stuff is kind of based around the 200 mile to 300 mile range of Calgary. And again, Alberta did have a residential, a commercial, and they also had a farm solar program for the longest time. And then actually Canada now at the national level has the clean agriculture program. So you can apply for up to, I believe it's $500,000 in funding if you're a farmer and you want to transition your operations to clean energy. So that's another avenue that we are pursuing up here in Canada as well, and that's a
Yeah,
that's a na-
I'm,
that's a national program.
I'm glad you mentioned farmers. This is very important. Here in Illinois, we're going to convert some small fraction of the landscape, maybe 1%,
Hmm.
to solar and wind farms. We have great farmland, some of the best high productive corn and bean production in the world. But when you convert that land to a solar farm, for example, you're now creating organic farm ground. It's going to be a solar farm for 30 years. If you do this right, you won't need chemical inputs. You plant basically short grass prairie underneath the solar array. So we have something called the pollinator checklist. So you plant pollinator friendly plants that require very little maintenance. And once they're established, after 3 years of, you need to do some mechanical removal of weeds and maybe some chemical removal of weeds in the first 3 years. But if you get that prairie going, then it's self-regenerating, and you might need to mow or put sheep on it, once or twice a year. But for the most part, it's going to be very low maintenance. It's going to be much lower runoff than what was there before. The roots of these prairie plants go very deep, and so they create highways for water to go down into the soil, and the soil becomes a sponge. It also accumulates much more carbon, right? So it's sequestering carbon into the soil. The soil is becoming alive. It's a whole ecosystem when you're not dumping all these pesticides and nutrients on it, most of which come from the fossil fuel industry. So that's high carbon inputs in traditional corn and bean farming. And but for the farmers, they get this steady income. You can get $900 an acre from a solar farmer, whereas from corn and bean farming, if you're renting your ground, you're getting $300 an acre. So you can triple your income, and it's steady income. It's not going to ebb and flow. It's going to be steady Eddie for 30 years with a small escalator. Um, and so it actually will help rural communities stay on the land. That's a major challenge for farming towns and communities around the Midwest is keeping families on the land. The kids want to go to the cities, and farming is hard work. And so uh, there's this whole brain drain, and these small towns are dying. So renewable energy is a lifeline for rural communities, and a real injection of money into the community, which is great for schools and local government. So it's a huge win.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we call it we call it, I think, agrivoltaics. I think that's been the terminology that I've seen thrown around,
Yep.
where you like you said, lease. I know there's a few like Mennonite colonies that have done similar projects like that in Alberta. Um, like I said, Alberta there when they had their before they got the progressive government back in again, they were making a lot of headway in that department.
Yeah, we in the solar industry, if you can make multiple uses of a solar array, then we call it dual use. And agrivoltaics is one of those dual uses where you can actually grow crops or run sheep, and sometimes other livestock. But sheep are the ones that are really getting traction, it seems like. Goats are a little too jumpy. They want to jump on the solar panels, and so they're not great for solar arrays. They also like to chew on everything under the sun, including wires. But people are successfully running sheep on solar farms. We have an organization called ASGA, the American Solar Grazing Association, which I'm a member of. I had Lexi Hain on the Solar Podcast, so you can check that interview out on YouTube. And what they're doing is connecting farmers to solar developers, farmers who are looking for opportunities to either graze sheep on other lands or develop their land into a solar array and do agrivoltaics on some of their land. And you can absolutely get more product more productivity, more economic productivity out of a piece of land by doing dual use solar or agrivoltaics than you can out of just solar or just livestock.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we could talk about this forever, I think. uh, but is there any last or final closing thoughts you'd like to chat about here, Tim, before we sign off?
Well, if anybody is listening to this who wants to talk about solar, I love talking about solar. I'm happy to be a guest on their show or bring them onto my show as a guest, the Clean Power Hour. Check out the Clean Power Hour. That's the URL, cleanpowerhour.com. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Love connecting with people on LinkedIn or on Twitter, TG Montague. And I really am grateful for this opportunity, Will. My motto is let's grow solar and let's do it fast.
Yeah, we got 2030s coming up fast. All right. Well, once again, thanks for coming on. The Yukon Gold podcast is about creating a sustainable future for everyone here on planet Earth, now based out of Whitehorse, Yukon, and many more productive solar days ahead of us, I think. All right.
Thank you.